Hello and welcome back to Quick Book Looks. Today we're going to be looking at They Did Bad Things by Lauren A. Forry. This is a mystery thriller. Evidence recovered, seized from person or location. Wolf Heather House, Isle of Doon. Remarks diary located immediately upon entrance to house on doormat. Footprint on cover belongs to first officer on scene. Missing pages not yet recovered. Pages 1 through 3. To whom it may concern. You're not afraid of doing bad things. You're afraid of getting punished for doing them. No, not me, you say. Really? Okay, think about it like this. It's your lunch hour, you're thirsty, but you forgot a drink. The vending machine is broken, and the nearest shop is a 15-minute walk. You've already lost 10 minutes because Sheila from accounts won't shut up about free range chicken salad, so by the time you reach the shop, you have only 40 minutes left. Even if you hurry, that will only give you 25 minutes to eat once you get back to the office. Wouldn't it be easier to grab a bottle of Coke from the shelf and walk out of the shop rather than wait in line while some old biddy pays the cashier in 1p and 2p coins, and the young mother after her remembers she has to grab one more box of nappies, and the schoolgirl who's next should probably be in class right now is too busy reading Heat magazine to move up in the queue? Wouldn't it be 10 times easier to take what you need and leave the shop? Of course it would, but you don't. Why? Because store security would chase after you, give you a warning, maybe even phone the police, who might give you a pat down just to make sure you weren't nicking something worth more than 90p. Might even ban you from the shop or arrest you. So you don't do it. But you would if you could. That's only a bit of light shoplifting, you say. That's not a serious crime. That's not like murder. You'd never murder anyone. Everyone thinks they'd never commit murder. And I'd say, even if you wouldn't get in trouble, and you shake your head and talk about morals or throw in God for good measure. And I'd say, isn't fear of getting in trouble with God fear of getting in trouble? And maybe you're an atheist, so you care fuck all about God, but still you say you wouldn't do it. Why? Because you say you'd feel guilty, and that guilt would eat you up until you were so desperate for the pain to end, you'd turn yourself in because then it wouldn't be a punishment, it would be relief. The police will tell you it's not your fault. They want you to believe that. You're young and attractive, and the whole world is in front of you, so they say it right to your face. It's not your fault about Callum. Like they want to believe there's good in people. They should know better. Well, what if you could kill someone and not get in trouble and not feel any guilt? What if you could take a life as easy as taking the Coke from the shelf? Think about it. Really think about it. Oh, wait. You've got a specific person in mind, don't you? A celebrity, a politician, a coworker, maybe a friend? That one person that makes you think the world would be so much better off without them? Yeah, that one. See, I knew what you were thinking because at their heart, and the police know it, people care about nothing except themselves. Given the choice, they'll always take the easy way out, the way without guilt, without pain. Face it, people aren't really very nice. Except Callum. He was a nice person. Maybe that's where he went wrong. Maybe if he hadn't been so nice, he'd still be breathing. I've always known that people were shit. However, it wasn't until I got older that I realized there are three different kinds of shit. I learned it from a ghost story. Well, not a ghost story per se, more like monsters. The story goes that there once was a Scottish laird, an owner of a manor in the Highlands, who bred a pack of wolf dogs to protect his property. These were large, terrible beasts with coarse gray fur that got matted with blood whenever they ate, but they could be playful and loving so as long as they got their way. One night the lord had a guest, and to honor him, a fine cut of venison was prepared. To appease the pack, the lord gave each dog some of his meal. The guest, famished from the long journey, refused to relinquish a single morsel of his own meal despite the lord's request. At the end of the night, the guest retired to bed, only to be woken a short time later by someone breathing in his ear. He opened his eyes to admonish the maid for disturbing him, but it was not the maid's eyes he saw. Before he could scream, the pack leapt and tore what was theirs straight from his belly. And that's people. People are the tired guest, or they'd be part of the pack, or they're the lord. The lord, I've always thought, was the worst because he knew what the pack might do, but did he try to contain them, distract their attention, make provisions to protect his guest's life? No. In the story I was told, he hid deep in the manor, more concerned with what might happen to him than what might happen to another. So that's what I know about people. People hide and people cheat and people lie and people only look out for themselves because people are shit and very few deserve better. And Callum should have known this. This was the story he used to tell, but now I guess it's mine. This is word for word what I had sent the Inverness Courier. They never printed it. Apparently, they felt it was inappropriate for an obituary. But I put it here at the beginning because this is what I wanted you to read first. Before I tell you what they did to him, before I tell you what I did to them, I want you to understand that I know which of the three I became. What I want you to think about is very simple. Which one are you? Friday, Chapter 1. Hollis. A sudden onslaught of rain splattered the windshield, drowning out Bon Jovi. Hollis Drummond swerved back and forth on the single-lane road, fumbling to find the wipers on the unfamiliar car. Refusing to stop living on a prayer, he turned up the volume and belted the chorus as he finally hit the windshield wiper lever. But unlike Tommy and Gina, he had no clue if he was halfway there because his phone was no more than a black brick. Hiring a car without GPS for a 5-hour drive to the Isle of Skye, followed by a 30-minute ferry ride, followed by another 30-minute drive on a mostly uninhabited island, thinking he could rely on said phone might not have been his most brilliant idea, he decided as he jiggled the cables. The charger was attached to the phone port, the other end plugged into the car, but his mobile was not charging. Probably hadn't been since he picked up the car in Inverness. Disconnecting and reconnecting the cable did nothing. He thought about ringing Linda for directions, then remembered the dead phone was the reason he needed the directions in the first place. Timing his movements to the percussion, he tossed the useless thing onto the passenger seat. The road led only one way anyway. The headlights illuminated the rocky landscape as he continued north, highlighting a patchwork of browns and dull greens, the vibrant purples and yellows of heather and gorse now out of season. Hollis liked the colors as they were. They reminded him of the brown and gray streets of Manchester, those he'd plodded up and down for so long, and which, come Monday, he would see from a new angle. No uniform pressing for PC Drummond this weekend. A new pair of suits awaited him along with polished black shoes and a red tie with the subtle Manchester United watermark logo, a gift from Linda. It might have been thanks to his blind luck with the Marcus case, but he'd finally done it. The lads had taken the piss, of course. Hollis Drummond, mid-40s, the phrase pushing 50, just around the bend, his dozen of exams taking up a whole drawer in the filing cabinet, had finally made detective. He pretended it wasn't that important, joked that some people needed to age like fine wine or stinking cheese, someone had blurted out. They tried to embarrass him by taunting him about his new partner, Khan, being 10 years his junior and already a DS. If Hollis were lucky, they said, he'd be promoted to DS right in time to be pensioned off. Hollis shot back, saying Khan's success had something to do with him being Asian. Dad, that's so racist, Linda would have said, so he hadn't told her that bit, even though Khan was always saying the same thing himself. Unlike Khan, Hollis was never that good at laughing at himself, but he had gone along with the old man jokes to cover up how excited he was and nervous. Here he was on his last pre-CID holiday with a bottle of Dalmore and a few cheap paperbacks, a whole weekend to kick his feet up while the anticipation for Monday built like the final days before Christmas, and he still wasn't sure he deserved it, the promotion, the trip, any of it. Part of him thought he should be at home seeing Dr. Bevan one last time before his new Monday shift. But Linda had been so proud of him, and so pleased she had pulled off this surprise. He couldn't disappoint her, even if instinct had been needling him to turn around since Inverness. He turned the stereo up another notch. It was dark now, but Hollis still wondered if he'd see one of those orange cows Linda loved before the weekend was out. Coos, she had said. They called them Highland coos. Keeping his eyes peeled for a coup, Hollis almost missed the silver SUV blocking his path. He jerked the car left and slammed on the brakes. Shit. As Bon Jovi yowled about steel horses and six strings, Hollis let out a slow breath, then switched the stereo off. The sudden silence was deafening as he lifted his gaze to the rearview mirror. The only reason he and the SUV hadn't collided was because the SUV wasn't moving. He could see it lifted up on a jack, but from his vantage point, he couldn't see anyone changing a tire. Using the keychain torch he kept in his pocket, he hopped out to check for signs of the driver, turning up his collar against the rain. Mud and cow dung wafted in the air as needles of rain pricked his face. Wet gravel lodged into the sole of his boots. Though he was hundreds of miles from his own jurisdiction, he couldn't switch off the part of his brain that urged him to help, holiday or not. After all, hadn't he found Catherine Marcus on a day like this? A dark night, heavy mist, no other passerby. There was no one inside the car, though, tied up or otherwise. The doors were unlocked and the driver had left the keys on the seat. There were no personal belongings, and the registration indicated that, like his, this was a hired car. Nothing to indicate who had driven it here or who had abandoned it. Hollis had been the only car on the ferry, hadn't passed anyone on his way in, saw no pedestrians in the distance. Out of habit, he checked for signs of blood or a struggle, but found none. The tire iron was missing, but no body lay in the ditch, not as far as he could see, which, albeit, wasn't far. He cupped his hands to his mouth and called out, listening to his voice carrying over the rain, then waited for a response. None came. The longer he stood there, the more the rain soaked through his jacket. He shouted one more time. Back in his car, he shook his head like a wet dog and dug through his bag for the reservation confirmation. Wolf Heather House, The Bend, Isle of Doon, IV558GX. The little square map showed the area 10 kilometers around, but the last he'd looked at his phone before it died, he was still 15 out. Hollis tossed the confirmation aside and restarted the car, scanning the horizon for any sign of the missing driver. The phone chirped, the red battery icon glowing before going back. 3 minutes later, it held enough charge to power up, and he re entered the address in Google Maps. Now stay that way, mate. He gave the phone an encouraging pat, taking one last glance at the abandoned car as he drove off. Though the music continued, he stopped singing along. Leaving a car like that in a place as isolated as this, it didn't feel right, especially when the only problem seemed to be a flat. Each time he thought he'd glimpsed a movement, he slowed, but there was never anything to be seen. A few minutes later, the turnoff for Wolf Heather House appeared on his right. The main road disappeared in the rear view as he accelerated down a bumpy gravel path that, according to Google Maps, did not exist. The blue arrow that represented his car hovered in a tan abyss. After a few minutes, he had started to think this was all a practical joke orchestrated by Linda and the lads at the station when a sharp turn into the drive brought the well lit house into stark view. All slammed on his brakes. Fuck me. He grabbed the confirmation page, but the sole picture showed his guest room, not the entire cottage, or rather, what he had assumed would be a cottage. Last time he'd been on holiday, it had been in the basement room in the L something hotel in Benidorm that smelled of stale lager and flop sweat. Music from the club upstairs had reverberated through his mattress like an unwanted massage. He'd been expecting something on par, if maybe moderately better, but even if Wolf Heather House had a cellar, it was probably nicer than his own flat. The three-story brick and stone manor was smaller than the mountains surrounding it, yet presided over the landscape like the lord who must have once owned it. The only time he'd been in the house this gorgeous was on Midsummer's Murder, but his admiration faded as he continued down the drive. The longer he stared at the once beautiful Wolf Heather house, the more faults he found. Chipped brickwork and broken sashes, overgrown hedges and weeds nesting in the flower beds, cracked urns flanking the doorway like decorations for a funeral parlor. As he pulled in next to a banged up Vauxhall sedan, the bad feeling he'd had on the main road returned. It was the same feeling he'd had when he made Frank Landry pop the boot of his Ford Fiesta, knowing he'd find Catherine Marcus tied up but breathing. It wasn't instinct alone that had caught Landry, but Hollis's eye for detail. Perot minus the OCD, an old partner had once described him. It helped Hollis remember traits and faces so that Landry's attempt to conceal his features had looked poorer than a child dressing up for Halloween. Hollis got out of his car and stared up at Wolf Heather. With the sunlight near gone, darkness enveloped most of the house. Unlit windows gave the facade the look of a spidery many black eyes. Maybe he did deserve this place after all. Hollis made himself laugh. Adrenaline and exhaustion were getting him worked up. That was all. He hoisted his kit bag over his shoulder and made his way inside. The lobby of Wolf Heather House warded off the chill outside. In the grand entranceway, a wide staircase laid a red carpeted path to the next floor. Exposed beams crossed the elevated ceiling to the left of the main entrance. A peat fire burned in a stone fireplace, filling reception with a welcoming scent that reminded him of his Irish great-grand's cottage. Two overstuffed armchairs sat in front of the fireplace like a pair of old friends. A forgotten red carryall left a puddle on the floor. A series of closed doors lined the wall to his right, and muffled voices permeated through one of them, a hushed argument like his parents would have before his father stormed off to his mates for the night. I don't care why. What matters is that a sweating, red-faced young man, a cordless phone pressed to his ear, emerged from a different door on the right and closed it behind him. Tall and lanky, with a shock of ginger hair, he looked like a scarecrow that had descended from the fields, a scarecrow wearing a designer suit. Hang on. Checking in, eh? Drummond? Yes, sir. How'd you know? I'm a bloody psychic. No, I was being facetious, he said into his phone. Look, get your affairs in order and he rolled his eyes and pointed to the paper register. Sign here. No, I don't need your signature, he said down the phone. Are you a complete monkey's ass? Hollis scribbled his name in the book, but the young man swept it away before Hollis could read any of the other names. There were at least four others, though if none had been recorded on the previous page, perhaps one of them belonged to the disabled SUV. Hollis pointed to a wooden nameplate on the desk. Are you Mr. McLeod? Back on the road, there's a. Do I look like a fucking Dougal McLeod? Yeah, I am referring to you, he said into the phone. Your fans are asking after you, so you better get your ass up here by the last ferry, or I'll say more about you besides. He checked the phone onto the desk. Let me find your key. It's around here somewhere. Fucking paperwork. There's a filing cabinet right bloody. He swept some paper onto the floor. Do you need to see any ID? You say you're Hollis Drummond? I am. Good enough for me. Everyone else for this weekend is already here. Did one of them have car trouble? There's a disabled vehicle. They're all in the dining room if you want to ask, waiting on dinner that I have to prepare like some fucking housewife because the fucking hired help. He held up his hands, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath, which only made him look more like a toddler having a tantrum. Apologies, sir. Bit of staffing problem. Here's your key. Room 6, top floor. Room 6. A little chill ran through Hollis. The sound of glass breaking echoed from the dining room, and the indistinguishable voices rose. I suppose I have to see to that now, too. The young man hurried to the dining room, giving Hollis enough time to glimpse a blonde woman with her head in her hand before the door shut. He didn't see her face, but something about her posture, the crystal blue color of her blouse, triggered a memory. Sticky green carpet and the smell of fried chicken. He stared at the key in his hand, then at the door. But he was being paranoid. There were other guests here, clearly, but no one he would know. He started up the stairs. His back, stiff from the long drive, ached as he walked up to his third floor room. Plush red carpet continued to line the hallway to his left, where dark maroon walls surrounded closed doors stained a deep brown. To the right, a sagging, frayed rope blocked off a dark hall, the floor bare and lined with sheet-covered furniture. A misspelled, handwritten sign pinned to the rope read, "Closed for renovation." Hollis followed the carpet. All that distinguished his door from the others was the brass 6 gleaming in the yellow light of the wall sconce. Before unlocking it, he imagined feeling a rush of cold air escaping from within, bringing with it black dust and a smell of must. But the door opened soundlessly to a clean scent Hollis traced to a Glade plug-in by the bed. The interior matched what he had seen in the website photos. The walls suffered the same maroon color as the hall, and the paisley patterned bedspread spoke of years of use. A desk, high back office chair, and bedside table completed the furniture, but nothing matched, as if the pieces had been scavenged from throughout the house. Stepping between the bedroom and bath, however, was like traveling through time. The small bathroom had been renovated with a modern waterfall shower, white ceramic sink, and water efficient toilet. Black tile lined the wall and gray slate the floor. Back in the bedroom, he wanted to text Linda and tell her he'd arrived safely, but his phone, which had died again, didn't have enough power yet. He unplugged the air freshener, plugged in his phone, and then searched through his bag for some paracetamol, finding the Delamore first. Don't drink it all in one weekend, mind, Linda had laughed as she handed him the bottle. With his pocket knife, Hollis sliced the gold ribbon from the neck of the bottle and flattened the gift tag out on his knee. Her teary scrawl, "Congrats, Dad," smiled up at him. Linda was so proud of him it hurt, especially when he didn't think he deserved such admiration. He tossed the bottle back and forth in his hands and considered pouring a drink, but stopped himself. If he started drinking now, he might not stop. He would try it later when he had a full stomach and a clearer head. He'd send Linda a picture of himself with a glass of it, maybe use one of those silly filters she'd install on his phone. He tucked her note into the breast pocket of his shirt. The wind battered the building as Hollis made his way down the cold hall, which held a damp whiff of wet dog. He straightened his shirt cuffs, eager for the warm fire downstairs, when a thump sounded from behind him, nothing but closed doors and the weight of a presence. "Oi!" he shouted, hoping to startle anyone who might be there. Nothing save the wind responded. He waited a few seconds more, then shook off his paranoia. Maybe he should have had that drink first, he thought. Reception was empty, so he warmed his hand by the fire and breathed in the smell of burning peat, enjoying the quiet he never got to have in Manchester. Until the heated voices from earlier erupted into a full-fledged argument. Hollis dropped his hands, just what he needed, some domestic spat where he'd have to play peacekeeper. He slipped into his policeman's persona as he paused at the door. "Trouble follows me, Linda," he once told her. "Dad, you only say that because you're a copper. What you think is trouble is normal to everyone else." But when he opened the dining room door, he knew they'd both been wrong. This wasn't normal, and it was worse than mere trouble. The shouting ceased once he stepped inside, the four other guests looking far less surprised than he. He logged each of their faces, their names popping into his head if he'd spoken to them yesterday, not 20 years ago. Maeve Okafor, wet frizzy hair enveloping her head like a bird's nest, jeans a size too small, and jumper two sizes too big, her ballet flats caked in mud. Eleanor Hunt, body thin and sharp as a knife, her long blonde hair chopped off in a line so straight it could cut. Oliver Holcomb, his black leather jacket with a sweatshirt hood meant for a man a decade or two his junior, a beer gut, and an almost but not yet comb over. Lorna Torrington, sensible skirt and a turtleneck that concealed her large chest, the same black bob framing her face. Lorna flipped her fringe out of her eyes, and suddenly he was back in that room in that house with the people and the black niggle in his stomach that told him to run now, fast and as far as he could. Thank you for joining me for another quick book looks. I hope you're intrigued and you're interested in reading more about it. Make sure that you check it out from the local library, and I hope you join me again next week.